ChatGPT might have been the first big player on the block, but it was followed almost immediately by Bard. There's a competition in this market, and it's becoming an industry like any other. But there's one thing that's been missing in the AI world up to now, and that thing is open source software. Open source has been a part of the internet for a very long time, and it is a core driver of development and improvement in internet spaces. Luckily for you, there is a new open source AI chat system that's out there today, and on this video, we're going to talk all about it. We're going to talk about what it is, how it compares to ChatGPT, and whether open source AI is really a good idea or the tip of a very dangerous spear. My name is Trent Kennelly. I'm a Web3 marketing strategist, and this is the best place for you to learn about Web3, NFTs, AI, and how to market it all. So if that sounds good to you and you're excited, make sure that you like this video, subscribe to my channel if you're into it, comment to let me know whether you think that this open source idea for AI is a good or terrible one. I would love to get your perspective on this, and let's get started. Okay, so what is this open source AI chat alternative? It's called StableLM, and it's from a website called huggingface.com. You can go to that website right now to try it out if you want to. I'm going to provide in the description a link to the chat and the documentation so you can read more about it in more technical detail. And in that documentation, you can dig into all the ways that you can use this platform right now, which of course makes sense because it's open source. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, open source just means that while an individual or a team, of course, put in the work to develop the project, they then opened it up to anybody to do anything that they wanted with it. So they gave the source code to the world, and that world can now make that project into what they want for their particular solution. That doesn't mean that things are completely free all the time, but it does add a lot more flexibility to whatever your personal use of the project is. So just to get a better feel between these two, between ChatGPT and StableLM, let's run a few points of comparison just to kind of understand what we're looking at here. The first thing I want to compare is the data set. So the question that we're trying to answer here is how ChatGPT and its open source counterpart were trained up, because we generally have two options to train an AI chatbot to get it to the level where it can communicate in the way that it's able to, okay? The first of these two options is the most widely used. It's the generative pre-training transformer, or GPT, which is currently in its 4th version, and it's most well known because ChatGPT, right? It's in the name. This data set has gathered, past tense, millions and billions of data points, and it, of course, uses those data points to process and respond to natural language in a natural way, right? But the biggest weakness to this model is that limited data set. It's seemingly getting updated constantly, but there is not a continuous flow of data to the GPT model. It stops around 2021, sometime like the end of 2021. It doesn't, for instance, even know about the FTX meltdown from around November 2022, even though it is getting constantly updated with data, but again, not a continuous flow of data. The second is the language model for dialogue applications, or Lambda. So this is used by applications like Google's Bard. The huge advantage of this model is that it has what's called an infiniset, which means that instead of having a fixed data point set, it has a constant drawing set of new data points that they're just pulling directly from the internet so that it can find answers to any question that's being asked. So which of these does StableLM use? Well, I have to say that even though there are generally these two models, it is not super clear which one of these that StableLM seems to use. It kind of seems to fall somewhere in the middle. The documentation claims that they're using a few different GPT models kind of smashed together, it seems like. But if you ask the model directly on huggingface.com, it's going to tell you that it uses statistical modeling to gather and respond to data in the proper way. And if you push the model, it really just does not want to give you a clear answer. That said, you can also see in the documentation that the data set is still growing. At the time of making this video, it's only around 7 billion data points, with a plan at some point to reach 175 billion. But it still kind of boils down to a system that, much like ChatGPT, is limited in scope to a point in 2021 when that data set, a mass data set of everything, seems to just kind of stop. And no, it also doesn't know anything about the FTX collapse. The next thing we need to know about is, of course, cost. How much are we paying? Both of these systems are free for a large portion of their functionality, but a company's got to make money somehow, right? So ChatGPT offers a $20 plus plan. This is a service that simply offers higher priority, better uptimes, and first access to new features, seems to be it. Honestly, I'm just editorializing here, but I can't see the real value add. Sure, ChatGPT used to crash all the time, but that's an issue that's mostly been fixed. Everything else? Who really cares? You're still getting the same great functionality. It just might be a little slower if you don't pay. The Hugging Face StableLM pricing is a little bit more confusing, and that's kind of expected, but at the same time, it still isn't super different. Still, given that this is open source platforming, people are going to use it in many different ways, so they're going to need to add variety to their pricing. So here's what it looks like. There's a $9 a month premium option, which seems to provide similar things to ChatGPT. And then there are inference endpoints, which go for 6 cents an hour. So an inference endpoint is a service by Hugging Face that makes deploying a project that was developed using Hugging Face and StableLM much easier. It's just an easy application service. And all of that leads to the biggest comparison between these two, flexibility. Now, there are two angles that we're going to be looking at when it comes to flexibility, and each system comes out on top of one of them. First, how much can StableLM and ChatGPT actually talk about? There aren't exact numbers because the data sets are so incredibly large, but it appears that StableLM can report to having processed 16 terabytes worth of data, and ChatGPT can claim 45 terabytes. Now, that might not sound like a lot, but if each byte was a grain of rice, 16 terabytes would mean 640 quadrillion grains of rice. And if each grain of rice is 5 millimeters in length, then laying them end to end would make a line 3.2 billion kilometers long. That's like going from Earth to the sun and back 10 times. 45 terabytes, on the other hand, using that same math, is 1.8 quintillion grains of rice, and that's like traveling from the Earth to the sun 30 million times. There's a pretty massive difference between 30 million and 10, the integer 10, right? So there's no question that the resources that you have to work with are much, much greater with ChatGPT. But how about its other use cases? You want to use it as a chatbot on your website, right? Or maybe you want to bring it onto your own server to quickly process your own information. So far, ChatGPT itself is mostly stuck to the website. There are, of course, exceptions to this, like where big companies want to pay to use it as a baseline for their own services. A good example of that being Bing Chat, right? StableLM, on the other hand, can be pulled off the shelf and used today if you want. That code is literally on GitHub for StableLM. I'm not saying that you can just pop in and start using it unless you're a coder, but there is a huge advantage to installing this particular platform as opposed to just about anything else on the market. All you have to do is go to huggingface.com and ask the chat how to install itself, and then follow the steps for how it can install itself on your website. That's about as flexible as it gets. Okay, so that kind of gives you an idea of the differences between these two, but it's also really, really important to discuss some of the pros and cons of open sourcing an AI platform like this. So let's start with a pro, because I'm a positive dude, and that is transparency. Open source, by its very nature, is way more transparent. You can clearly see what people are doing with the project and the different ways that it's being used. This increases trust and usability in the project over time, which is going to have more people wanting to use it. It increases that critical mass, and it just rolls down the hill from there. But the first con is kind of the backwards inverse of it, because security is a huge, huge issue when it comes to open sourcing AI. One of the reasons that OpenAI actually closed off ChatGPT from being an open source project is because they wanted to control who used the platform and how they used it. Every good use of a technology always counterbalances with something bad or evil or some misuse. And getting AI to take unilateral action to damage businesses or lives of others is a real scary possibility. This is a huge, huge downside to open sourcing AI. Another pro, open source is highly, highly customizable. If you know how to do it or can hire someone to do it, then you can make any open source project into anything that you want, which means that this project could literally be turned into a chatbot specifically for your site, which would be awesome, right? Because it would keep people from needing to say something in a specific way to get a response, or from you having to have all of the possible ways that someone could possibly write a question before they would get the answer that you want to give them, right? But this also comes with its own con. complexity. The more that you customize something, the more complex it can become, which means that you could be putting yourself in development hell forever. And one more set of pros and cons: cost effectiveness versus quality. So the pro is that you don't have to build this thing from scratch. It's very cost effective. There's no need to spend all this time and money developing your own 16 terabyte AI system. You just piggyback on what's already been done, right? But of course, the quality perspective is a bit more suspect. There's more of a question there because open source is a different beast from something that's closed off like ChatGPT, because there are more people working on it from all different disciplines and skill levels, volunteers, etc. So while it can often come out to be very great, there's also a risk of things not going well because of the open sourcing process. So there you go. There's the rundown of the new system. I think it's really interesting, and I'm definitely going to be looking into implementing it in some way on my own site. Let me know what you think about this, if it's too dangerous, if it's too interesting, or something else. I would love to get your thoughts on it. I think that there's a lot that can be done, but I can definitely see the scary angles as well. Otherwise, make sure you like this video, subscribe to my channel if you're into it, and I will catch you in the next one.